All right, hello everybody. Welcome back. I am still not quite back in my original setup. It's been a very hectic couple of days, but I figured that I would come on here to talk about my tournament a little bit. For the regional championship in Hartford, I tried something a little bit different. So I have a couple of friends that have gotten fairly close to the Pro Tour a number of times, but had, just been falling short. And they weren't quite sure, exactly what it was or what possibly could be happening. And, I think that I frequently take for granted how great it is to be able to work with Sanctum and all of the other pro players that I get to communicate and listen to their opinions and learn from them. And so for this event, I tried to kind of make a new environment for like both me and a couple of my friends. And so I took a couple of my friends that were pretty close to queuing in the past, some of my friends from, several different teams. I threw us all in a Discord server and I said, hey, if you want to participate, great. If you don't, there's no expectations. It's just kind of like a place to talk about our opinions and, just kind of grow together. And so I did this with the intention of my friend Julian, right here in this top 8 photo in the purple shirt. I started working with Julian after Pro Tour OTJ. Actually, I think originally I was coaching him in Slogurk. And then he lives in New York, I live in New Jersey, and so after that, we would see each other at RCQs, hang out, do whatever. And he had been getting increasingly frustrated because he was every event, 1 win off, 2 wins off. And at that point, like at some time, you're going to get it. But I figured that a new perspective might be something kind of useful. And so I want to start this video off by saying congratulations, Julian. I have no words. I'm so happy for you. Seeing you scream and get excited and finding out that you qualified for Worlds when you got the pass down. All of these things were like key points of my memory over the weekend. So congratulations. I do also want to say congratulations to the rest of this little tiny Discord server. I believe between the two RCs there were 15 of us that played in these events, and we put 5 people into the Pro Tour, and had a 68% win rate in Hartford, which are kind of crazy numbers, but Min qualified in Minneapolis, and at this event we had Julian, Wes Hickman, also qualified playing Prowess with no SWIFTSPEARs, Toothy, and oh, you'll have to apologize. I'm missing one. Who am I missing? Oh, Sam Bogue. Sam didn't play the SWIFTSPEARless version. He did play the version with SWIFTSPEARs, which is why I was a little bit blanked. But I want to say congratulations to everybody. I'm really happy of the work that this little server did. And, I'm happy with everybody's success. So I am going to start by talking a little bit about the deck we played and why. And then, I, as per usual, have the win rates and stuff sitting over here. So this is the deck I registered. It was maybe a card or two off of Julian's. And I think the biggest thing that you see here is that there is no Monastery SWIFTSPEAR. At this point, I'll insert the clip of Julian ripping Monastery SWIFTSPEAR on camera. Thank you, Calcano, for donating a Monastery SWIFTSPEAR for the cause. But what happened was during testing, at some point CFT mentioned a possible way to approach the mirror on the draw. And to this point, most of the people that I had spoken to that play this game a lot at a very high level talked about the mirror being a constant race. That, losing the die roll was a huge problem, and we were trying to find ways to break serve, ways to possibly improve our win rate on the draw because it seemed to be pretty abysmal. And CFT hopped into a server one day and was like, what if we can control the game post board? And it was the first time I have felt excited to test this format since Corey Steelcutter got printed. It just felt like I maybe could control the games a little bit more. And so we started by testing Into the Flood Maw. Into the Flood Maw, I think, is something that every single team that I worked with and every person I spoke to agreed with. Into the Flood Maw is incredibly positioned right now, and almost everybody I know registered 4 copies. And it started with that, and you could use, I know Julian has been considering Into the Floodmaw swords to plowshares. You could bounce otter tokens, it really sets them off tempo in Drakecatcher, and it gave you ways to kind of try to do that break of serve. Find ways to kind of set your opponent back enough that you were the one winning the race. And once we decided that Floodmaw was good in the mirror, because that wasn't clear prior to this event, I was pretty interested in this idea. I think CFT's gone back on it, and now did register a version with SWIFTSPEARs in the LCQs, but I didn't quite agree, and I kept working on it. I really liked the idea. And so what this idea involved was playing a couple of more shocks, a second Abrade, and keeping all 4 copies of Into the Floodmaw in, as well as spell piercing really aggressively. So you didn't have to wait for a cutter on 2 to spell pierce, but if my opponent cast Sleight of Hand, I was probably casting spell pierce. And so we kind of used it as a way to run the opponent out of resources. And Slickshot Show Off just seemed to be a better card in that deck than Monastery SWIFTSPEAR. Most people have treated this Slickshot Show Off Drakecatcher role as kind of interchangeable. Putting Drakecatcher in your deck was basically pre-boarding it for the mirror. It was a statement that your deck was strong enough already to beat the rest of the field and you didn't need Slickshot. However, Slickshot Show Off, I think, is just a better card than Monastery SWIFTSPEAR. The amount of times I committed psychic damage in this tournament just by plotting several copies of Slickshot Show Off was pretty great. And so, I'm really happy with the list and how we came to it. I think our plan was really strong. I think, our win rate was pretty great, and we ended up being the highest placing Prowess deck of the tournament. And so this is our list. I guess this is a good time to plug my Metify. I put a lot of time into content currently. I'm trying to do as much as I can to help the community in a way that doesn't cause any sort of financial burden on the people that support me. But as I, play a little bit more Magic and try to do a lot of this stuff, sideboard guides, coaching, things like that are great ways to support me to continue being able to do the content that I do. I did write a guide for Izzet Prowess. I did release this guide before Hartford. It was based off of the list from Minneapolis, and what I kind of pride myself in when I make these deck guides is that I try really hard to add heuristics and things that will help you learn to play the deck. Those are the things I think you get over time, and my goal with this $15 is to save you more than an hour of your time. And so, you can see here, I have to edit this table of contents I'm learning now, but you'll see an entire original, the original guide, which includes the SWIFTSPEAR version I played in Minneapolis. I'll talk about all the cards, why I played them. I'll talk about all of the sideboard options that you have, and then I go through my match-by-match plans, as well as discussions on kind of how I approach those matches. Then there's a section on heuristics. These are things like which cantrip should you cast, how should you sequence your spells, things like that. I'll do a section on mulligans, and then there's an entire second portion here where I'll talk about why we played the SWIFTSPEAR list version and why I think it is a good choice. The changes that we made to the deck. This is our sideboard guide that we used at the event. And then I have to finish this. I've been trying to get it done since I got to Hartford, but I'll talk about all my travel stuff in a second. I am also going to do an in-depth section on the mirror. So, it's $15. If you purchase this guide, you get everything that comes there, as well as any updates. That's kind of, I think, one of the nice parts of Metify. And so, if that is your cup of tea, then I appreciate the support. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about my tournament and, things I think I can do better in the future. One of the things that I do the most in Magic is I try to be very reflective. I try to assume that, there is always some amount of things in Magic that I can control, and I try to think about what of those things I can improve on going into the next tournament. So I took my parents on a cruise for my dad's 70th birthday the week before the event. For anybody that lives in the US or watches the news and isn't under a rock, I live in New Jersey next to EWR, which is my main hub airport, and EWR is a nightmare. All of the FAA flight controllers are out on trauma leave after losing connection with a flight, and they're canceling tons of flights. There's a lot of delays. There's just consistent issues currently happening at EWR, and it is getting slightly better over time, but like my flight from Minneapolis got canceled twice. It's just been a huge disaster. And so I was a little nervous, but flying to Miami, I had no problem. And my dad's birthday was a little bit more important than this tournament. And so I went on this cruise, and the plan was to get off the boat Friday morning. I booked the first flight I could out of Miami Friday morning. I was going to fly back to New Jersey, get in my car, get in the car with Min, hang out, drive to Hartford, and play in the tournament on Saturday. Well, my flight that was originally scheduled for 9:30 in the morning ended up getting delayed. We did eventually take off, but it wasn't clear that this was going to be true the whole day. What happened was, but aside from the normal issues that that was happening in Newark, there were also a bunch of weather issues happening in like the tri-state area. I know a lot of people had issues with their flights to Hartford that were preventing flights from taking off to the tri-state area. And so we originally got delayed to like 2:30 or something. And then we boarded the plane. And then after about half an hour of being on the plane, they deplaned us because the crew timed out. So apparently they schedule the crews to, fly specific times. And if the time goes past the amount of time that any of the crew members are supposed to be in the air, then the crew times out and they have to get a new crew. So at this point, they're talking to us and they're like, you have no crew. The desk's a disaster. Everyone's trying to figure out how they're going to get where they're going to go. There are flights like later that night, but it's not clear that any of them are going to be any better. At this point, several flights have been canceled. All of the flights out of Florida are getting delayed. And so, we're sitting at the desk. I'm trying to see if there's a way. Bradley is not a super accessible airport, so I was trying to see if there was a way I could get a connection to get into Connecticut for the morning, because there were people waiting on me to drive, and I didn't want it to screw their tournament up. But there were no options, and so thankfully they did get a new crew, and we took off at about 7 p.m., which was kind of brutal. I have all of the love in my heart. Thank you, Phil, and thank you, Min, for driving me. They set me up a little bed in the back of the car, and they picked me up and they drove me to Hartford. But I think between the flight was really bad. The turbulence was pretty brutal because of the weather. And then, being in a shaking car for a while, I finally got to Hartford. I think I got in bed around like 2:30 or 3, and I could not sleep. Like the inside of my body was shaking. And one of the things, if you've paid attention to me at all for the last year, that I have specifically tried to work on is taking care of myself at events, making sure I eat food, drink water, sleep. Those are things that I know bring me a lot of success at events, and especially sleep. I got about an hour of sleep the night before the tournament. I woke up on an adrenaline high, put the deck together, and I was pretty okay for the first couple of rounds. I started 4-0, which felt pretty good, and if you watched coverage, round 5 is when I tanked out. In round 5, I played Percy, the guy who won the tournament, and he's incredibly nice. I really like this guy. We had a nice conversation afterwards, but he's not the most lively. And I just could not keep myself awake. That was the first match where I feel like I really started seeing mistakes in my play. My ability to compute math ahead of time just became very difficult, which this is not a deck for that. And so I did end up finishing day 1 5-4 after starting off 4-0, which was a little disappointing, but in life you have to control the things you can control, and now I just know that I don't play events very well on no sleep. So that was my tournament. I think one of the other things, I spoke a lot to a couple of different players throughout the weekend on mindset, and kind of how that impacts your tournament. I think going into day 2, I said that this was going to be the time Julian qualified for the Pro Tour. He just, he is someone that tilts decently often, and he was just cool as a cucumber. He had the attitude, I guess. And this is something they talk a lot about in sports psychology, is, how the mental game kind of affects how you play, how your mindset, how you can frame those things, and how you can change it. And so going into the Pro Tour, we're a month away, I think I'm going to spend the next couple of weeks doing some research on how I can improve that mental game. I think I generally have pretty good mental when it comes to Magic players. I don't tilt super hard. I know that variance is a part of the game, and I think I typically approach things with a pretty good mindset. But I don't always sit down and be like, I feel pretty good today. I think I'm going to win this tournament. And I think sometimes that clouds my judgment and maybe prevents me from being as focused as I can be at events. And so that is kind of my main takeaway from this event and the thing I'm going to work on. I'm really happy that I made it to the event. I'm happy that the team did so well. I'm really happy of all the work that went into this event. I'm super thankful for SEG. Props, give claps to SEG. Running tournaments is not easy. There have been a number of companies across several of games that have tried to run tournaments, and I don't think people truly realize what a gift it is to start a 9-round tournament at 9 a.m. and be out of the building by 7:30. SEG, you did a really great job. Let's give one boo to the chairs. They were really, really uncomfortable. I think I actually am going to possibly invest in one of those travel seat cushions. Aside from the fact that it'll make sitting more comfortable, I'm also really short. If you ever watch me in any of my feature matches, I'm hunched up with my shoulders on the table trying to play because the tables are a little too high. And so I think I might invest in one of those. Maybe those will assist my process. So before we wrap up here, let's spend some time looking at standard, looking at the data. Top 8 was, I believe, pretty diverse. We had 3 prowess, apparently 1 Izzet and 2 just regular prowess, according to Play MTG. Orzhov Demons, Orzhov Pixie, 2 mono red, and then Chris Botello the GOAT back here on a blue-white control. I think that was a great choice for this event. And so, prowess is definitely still the clear deck to beat. 36% is kind of crazy. I believe it held 42% of the metagame day 2. And even with that massive percentage, it still had a 52.5% win rate. I believe that is the time where you acknowledge there is a problem in your format. I would be shocked that unless, I don't think they'll do an emergency ban. I am not one of those people that thinks that Wizards should push emergency bans. There are a lot of benefits to having, for your game, to having the ban list on a schedule, which means that we're probably not seeing a ban before the Pro Tour. Going into Final Fantasy, I think everybody knows that Izzet Prowess is the deck to play or the deck to beat. And so that's what it's going to be probably until the next ban list, unless the meta is able to adapt with Final Fantasy. And so, if you're looking for a deck to play, deck to learn, Izzet Prowess is a good choice. Dimir Midrange also doing pretty well. I believe still struggling a little bit in the prowess department. One of my friends, Forrest, queued for this Pro Tour with Dimir Midrange, playing 4 Duress in the main deck, which is kind of crazy. But if mid-range is more your speed and you're not in the mood to play prowess, mid-range looks to be a pretty good choice right now. The Boros Monument deck that Benton played, I think is pretty cool. I'll probably try to explore that sometime this week. And the rest of the format looking pretty similar. Omniscience Control still sitting up there. Domain sitting at an exactly 50% win rate with 1,000 games. That's kind of cool. And so, with this, we'll see how the meta develops. We've got a couple of other countries' RCs. There's a Standard Showcase qualifier this weekend, and that's probably all the data we get before the Pro Tour. Once the Pro Tour starts, there's a lot less incentive for players not playing in the Pro Tour to play Standard and work on things. And so it does end up being kind of a pressure to see how much you can figure out how quickly and explore all of that. And so with that, I will leave you guys. My plan for the rest of the week is I need to get home, get settled. I haven't seen my cat in several weeks. I have to unpack and get back to working and real life and my regular setup. So I'm going to try to be back tomorrow, but it may end up being Friday with, the daily to every other day videos. My first plan is to play SWIFTSPEAR Prowess. I'll talk about a little bit of our plan. Hopefully we can find some mirrors on the ladder and discuss those. Sometime over the weekend, I'm going to have Julian on. Julian's goal since he was 6, is what he'll always say, has been to qualify for the Pro Tour. And so I think Julian is a really great example of someone who it didn't come very easy for, who put a lot of work and energy into getting better at Magic to achieve his goals, and he's done that. And so I'm going to bring him on probably sometime over the weekend to talk about his path, what advice he has for others, and things like that. And then sometime over the weekend, I'm going to have Tristan hop in, and we're going to hop on Moto. A lot of people have asked me to play some Modern, with Modern RCQ season and stuff going on. Modern really hasn't been my priority. I've been playing in all these standard tournaments. RCQs I'm just busy. I'm all about the love of the game, but I try to go to all of the limited RCQs. I like limited more anyway. But we're going to hop on and play some Fair Neoform. This is a really, really great story, but for those who don't know, that have seen Fair Neoform blowing up on Moto, this started with a System Magic stream, where I was the guest, and Greg and Andrew came up with this elaborate plot where they were going to take a phone call in the middle of the stream and leave me to play Neoform for the first time. And so I called Tristan into the room, who cut the combo and played Fair Neoform, and since then a bunch of people have been working on the deck. It's really, really quite entertaining. So I'm going to take Tristan, the man himself, one of my favorite minds in Magic, and bring him on to play some Fair Neoform. And so that's kind of the plan. And going into the Pro Tour, I probably won't post a lot of what our standard prep looks like until after the event. I do plan on, taking videos at the testing house and, taking a video of our limited meeting and kind of giving an insight to the process. But with only 2 weeks to do it, all of the information that you and your team find are pretty valuable. And so I'm going to find probably other ways to explore the testing process prior to the Pro Tour than giving away all of our secrets. And so with that, I'll see you guys next time. If you want to support me, the best way to do that is by liking, commenting, subscribing. All these things help the algorithm. Metify is a pretty direct way to support me. I have, my guides on there. I'm thinking about doing like masterclass type things. I know a couple other people have done those things in the past. I don't really want to release any sort of content or host anything that I don't think is at its absolute best. And so I'm going to spend a little bit more time working on that. And if you are interested in coaching, I coach players of all levels. You can also see that through Metify. And with that, I will see you guys next time.